Alrighty, 7-Eleven, let's go ahead and start with the work session. And looks like you have a report on your report cards.
Yeah, so, let's see, Linda, do you have a report card slide deck from Desiree?
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll let you go ahead and kick it. I've done plenty of talking.
Well, as you all know, our report cards were officially made public. Just to clarify, typically this point at the time of the year, there's also an additional piece of information that the state gives us, which is called the detail sheet. And it has not yet been published by ODE. The bill's got more of an inside track on, I don't know if we know exactly why. The data is just like complicated this year. So just be aware that when that does come out, we'll let you guys know. And right now we have to just kind of like some information that we present to you guys, we end up having to just kind of figure it out ourselves. It's not official from the state at this point. So we wanted to give you just first off a quick tutorial on how to read the state report cards, especially because we have some folks that are new to us on the board and maybe haven't dug into the state report cards. On the cover sheets, you see a few different things. One is you get that overall view of how many students we have, as well as information on the different demographics groups we serve or special populations like Everett ELs. Everett ELs are students who at any time in their academic career were identified as English language learners. How many different languages are spoken, how many students with disabilities, our overall percentage of students with disabilities, our students who are identified as mobile, and our number of students, our percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Can you remind me what mobile is?
Mobile would be like they are moving in and out of the district.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's a certain like thing that then qualifies them as mobile. It's usually though like migrant or that type where they might come in and out multiple times.
I wasn't sure if that's for like unsheltered would fall.
I don't know, Dr. Rose, do you know if
It's
that off
okay.
the top of your head?
Info is in there.
Yeah. It might,
Okay.
yeah, it might be.
And you have as many as 11% that come and go. The same ones come for a while and then they're gone for a while, and they're gonna be gone for a certain period of time and then they're back.
Yeah, Yep.
And sometimes they're not back.
and sometimes they're not back, right?
Sometimes they move to another.
Interesting.
Yep.
So it's quite a number.
It is quite a number, and if you think about the needs that teachers put into place to make sure those students are being served, especially if they do come and go, or students who come in midway through the year, and like how do we make sure that they get the information they were maybe missing at the high school level? They have to do some transcript analysis to see what are they coming in with, and how do we make sure they keep on track, things like that, for sure. Then you also see the demographics, the overall picture of our demographic makeup of a district, and that information is both for teachers and for students. So we get to see our percentages of our different demographic groups. And then on the back page, you get this kind of snapshot of how many administrators, how many overall teachers we have, educational assistants, counselors, social workers, school psychologists, and then the percentage of teachers who have been in the district for more than 3 years. And so we're looking, the snapshot you see right here, this is for the district report card, which is a summary or an average of all the information from all of our schools. And then you also have links to each of the individual schools. And so that would be specific to those individual schools.
We're gonna talk about the district report card tonight.
Yes, yeah, they're just, and unlike other districts, the district report card for us is a really good tool to use because there's really only one school at each level, including even the fact that we have two elementary schools, but we only start counting the data at third grade. So it actually, they use the same exact data, except for like with attendance, et cetera. The next thing we wanted to kind of bring to your attention is that when we are thinking about the data that we are using, we have other pieces. Keep going back up to the previous slide, Linda, there you go. When we think about the data we're using, we have extra things, extra lenses that we kind of bring to that information. And this was something where Dr. Rhodes and Cheryl and I were in his office and we started talking about our cohorts of students and recognizing that, wow, there's a lot that impact our student populations. And this is a really good example of those impacts. So if we start thinking through our different cohorts of students, for example, that first column is our students who were kindergartners the year that we closed early. And then starting to trace through what their experiences were. So their first grade year was during CDL. Their second grade year is when we came back and we had a lot of attendance issues because we were sending everyone home that had even a sniffle or a cough, and telling people to stay home if they felt sick at all. And then last year, they took the test for the very first time. And we were really actually pleased. We saw some growth over previous years, but we know that that growth is still impacted by that former information. We also have those cohorts of kids who, those measures, the green boxes are the specific things that were measured by the state. So you can see those 8th grade math scores that are part of our metrics that we provide to the state are impacted by the fact that those students started the pandemic in 5th grade, et cetera. So you see some of those big transition years. 6th grade is considered a major transition year as they move from elementary to middle school. And theirs happened during CDL. Same thing with the cohort of 2024, their transition year of 9th grade. They were freshmen during CDL. So their first year of high school was online. And you'll notice with that one in particular, our freshman on track rate for their 9th grade year, that year was 50%. It was pretty shockingly low.
So those are our current seniors.
Yes, and those are our
So
current
we're kind of
seniors.
paying close attention to how, you know what I mean, how that group of kids is recovering.
So the great news with all of that is we see that we have some growth and we recognize that that growth has even more potential when we think about what we're doing to close those gaps for those kids and the experiences they had. The other thing that is part of the report card is attendance. And we wanted to specifically call out our attendance rates on here because our attendance rates overall for the district is an average of all of our schools. But in actuality, our attendance rate at the elementary was a lot lower than we had typically seen as a district, and was a lot lower than the state average, and actually brought our overall average way lower, even though our high school's average was at or above where the state is typically. So we wanted to make sure we kind of call that out. Great news about that one, I think we mentioned this at our last board meeting, is we're already seeing some really significant jumps in our regular attending rate. So we're anticipating that's going to keep getting better. The other one that we wanted to call out is our participation rates for the Oregon State Assessment. Because some of the data we're going to be looking at, specifically with high school, is deeply impacted by those participation rates. And so overall, for all the other grade levels, 3rd through 8th, we met the state expectation for participation, which is 95% of students taking the test. And actually, in some of our categories, we're at like 99% of our kids were taking the test, which is fantastic. But then you can see that that kind of big jump downward at the high school. And so this is a particular area of focus. I know for the high school, Ms. Janess and Mr. Jensen were specifically talking about how do we get more kids to see the value in this test. It's a hard one. Because there's not a lot of value.
We have an interesting law in Oregon regarding that, is we're required to announce to families that students may opt out of the test if they choose to, and all they have to do is check a box. And so we're required to let folks opt out by law, if they want to. And then we're held accountable for participation, on the pieces. So it's an interesting dichotomy.
And on top of it, it used to be when essential skills were required, it was easy to say to kids that taking the test was an easy, I don't wanna say easy, that is not the right word to use, but it was a one-shot way to demonstrate essential skills. If you passed the test, you met your essential skills, that box was checked. If you didn't pass them, there were additional steps you had to take to earn those essential skills. But those have been on hold since the pandemic, and right now, you remember being off the top of your head? We're anticipating at least a few more years
Yeah.
because they're readjusting all the diploma requirements. So at this point, even that kind of carrot of take the test for essential skills, and the community colleges are not doing us a favor. It used to be they would use them for placement tests, and now they said, nah, we don't want to use them for placement tests even. So we used to be able to say, take them because if you're planning on doing community college or college, it will help you get placed into your appropriate math class. And now the community colleges aren't using them. So it's hard to give that right carrot, incentivize kids to take part of this. And for us, we want them to take part because it's information. It helps us understand where our systems have gaps.
So the reason for creating this, for us, is in the context of how do you read the report card? We feel like this is an important piece of being able to read the report card and make some sense of the data. You could jump to certain types of conclusions, you know what I mean, when you see certain metrics. So actually knowing, about the experience of the kid, that prior to them being involved, is helpful in making interpretations of the data and thinking about what actions to take.
I'm curious on the participation one, if, our experience here is different than, sort of surrounding districts. Are there some unique challenges or characteristics of our district that have these numbers, in a different place than maybe other communities in the state, or sort of closer to home here, closer to our district, just to kind of help us understand why the numbers are what they are,
Yeah, I can,
beyond just because kids can opt out statewide. So
yeah.
presumably, if that was the only factor, I would think we would see similar sort of participation rates.
Yeah,
around the
it's
state.
been blurred a little bit by the pandemic, you know what I mean? So it's been, we didn't even have to take them at all for a couple of years. But the movement for opt-out began with schools like Summit High School, Lake Oswego High School. Some of the most schools that had theoretically the most capable students were the students that are opting out. And that's the trend. That's why it's important to keep track, of this opt-out notion, because what the data is that it's often, students that, many students that had the best chance to actually meet the standards on the test are the students that are opting out.
So that drags down the benchmark, the scores.
Theoretically, yeah.
Or certainly could, I guess.
Yes, it
I
could.
don't know for sure, because you can't do it both ways.
Right.
depending on what it be, but you would assume so.
How many of our kids opted out?
I could get you that number.
Sorry, I know I didn't ask for it. ahead of
But you
time.
see the
That's okay.
percentages, we have the percentages on that.
The percentage, yeah, so 50% of our students opted out of the ELA. So if you think about the junior class is 130.
50%.
That was
high
the
school.
That was the year
Year
before this, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So in 22, 20.
Yeah, it jumped up. We went up a little bit. So we went to 76%. So
25%.
25% of the students opted out. Yeah. And it kind of goes in waves. You'll get a few kids opting out and then they tell their
Mhm.
friends and you get a few more kids. And then suddenly we get like 15 and 20 in a day.
Day of the test.
The day of the test. Sometimes afterwards, there was an element of even kids who would finish the test and then the next day turn in the form, and we had to then contact the state and say, never mind, this kid opted out, and they invalidate the scores. So.
So we have to write a plan for maximizing participation. And then we have to send a note home to say, you can opt out. So, we keep thinking that will get fixed somewhere along the line, but it's kind of federal and, you know what I mean, it's kind of competing accountabilities.
So the next part of the report card you see are the actual kind of graphs that are demonstrating the different areas of measurement that we have from the state. So the first is our regular attenders. And as you can tell from that data from before, we did see an increase this last year, and we know that our high school was actually at or above the state average, and it was the combo of our high school scores connected with our elementary scores that brought it below the state average, and we are anticipating above the state average at this point. So we're seeing some good growth, but we know, I think we were talking about just that causal link. If you're not here, and even if you take the test, then it's going to be hard to do well on it because you haven't gotten the information you need. Regular attenders, the opposite side of regular attenders also is chronically absent, and chronically absent is a really narrow margin. It's like less than 10 days a year that you're sick or gone. So that's about 1 a month, a little less than one, or a little over 1 a month. And if you think about just your kids, how often are they sick? Once in a month? Probably pretty often. So a lot of our students, they may only be missing 1, maybe 2 days a month and be, in that chronically absent category. So some areas of strength though, our high school attendance is looking strong. We want to keep it growing. It's not like it's at 99% by any means, but we see some real growth there, especially compared to other high schools in the state. And we know that our area of focus is those attendance rates at the elementary schools. And we know that there's a link between those things as well. There's some pretty strong statistics that say kids who are chronically absent in elementary school will pretty undoubtedly be chronically absent in high school. Because if we can't get them to school when we can literally pick them up and take them in, we definitely can't get them into school when they are 2 foot taller than us. So we got to build those good habits when they're in elementary.
Do we
I'm
know,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, do we know why they're not coming to school? I mean, I know that's kind of hard to.
So I know at the elementary school, we have some homeschool contacts, and that is some of the data we're trying to gather as they reach out to families and say, hey, we've missed your kiddo. We're seeing a range of issues. Illness is still a big one. Kids that are just sick and feeling like they need to stay home. And there's definitely a mentality that was created with the pandemic, which is just keep your kid home if they're sick. And I think we see, I won't say we see less, but I think the send your kid with the sniffles is definitely less than it was before, right? So we have that, but we also, I know when our homeschool contact has done some reaching out to families, they're hearing more stories that are really more about those social safety nets, food insecurity, home insecurity, needing kids to stay home to watch younger siblings, and things along those lines.
I think what we find are the strategies are, try to make some bold, broad types of things, like make sure parents know how important it is for kids to get there, and those types of things. Make sure we have, our buses are getting to where they need to go, make sure that, our transportation system's in a good place, and you have this broad campaign. But it's the teams like that first photograph that I showed today, where you have to kind of get down into a case by case. There's a point where the broad brush doesn't work. You have to kind of start to know student by student what the issue is, and build your supports around the individual student needs.
All right. Next piece of data is our English language arts scores. And we saw, this is for 3rd grade. And so this, once again, that chart is really important because those are our kindergartners and our 1st graders that were deeply impacted by the pandemic. But we did see a jump of 6%, which is fantastic. And In terms of an area of focus for this next year, though, when we did some diving into the data, we are still seeing a pretty significant achievement gap between our white students and our Latino students. So the work we're doing with our ELD programs, and really making sure that we're utilizing that system-wide, how do we get good language acquisition strategies across the board is gonna be really important.
You will see this, you'll see this grade 3 on the primary school report card. It's the only, it's the only metric on the primary school report card. They actually don't give a test in K2, so our primary school actually doesn't, but they give the primary school credit for that 3rd grade, because they have them for 3 of the 3.5 years before they take the test.
Our next area is math, and math is a place where we're really gonna be watching our implementation of our new curriculum. While we did see an increase, it, was an increase from a score that was pretty low to begin with. So we're really doing a lot of focus on those good math strategies. We're using our Title IIA dollars to really focus on math strategies for teachers this year. We're really looking, like, the materials that we've received this year from our adoption has been, like, we're hearing good things already about just the approach that they are taking to math. Along with just the generalized area focus of increasing those scores overall, we obviously also saw some pretty significant gaps between our white and Latino students, and our males and female students had a gap. And so with our female students underperforming our male students. So those are areas we want to put some focus on.
This is, I mean, this is probably the one that is most concerning to me. I think in part, like, I remember a long time ago when I was in 7th grade, I got to go to an 8th grade class to do math. And that was, probably the time where I really started thinking, hey, I've got some aptitude here, and it shaped a lot of ways, I think, my career path later on in life, And so that's a critical time, I think, and it's troubling to me to see that gap be as large as it is, because I think there are a lot of students probably that, I'm concerned that there are a lot of students that might be missing that opportunity to say, hey, this is bad.
A strength.
And, 30 years later, there's still challenges getting females recruited into engineering positions or STEM or STEAM, roles. And so seeing that gap even today is troubling. So, yeah, I'm encouraged by the improvement, but hopefully that's one that we can continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Focus on.
We're thinking, we have improvement, just, because I think there's this notion of when you shine a light hard enough on something, it starts to brighten up a little bit. And because we were going through an adoption last year, now we're implementing new materials, there's a lot of focus on it. We're hoping that phenomena, occurs in mathematics. We start to see that build again. So we've also, at the middle school, a staff member too can make a difference, and so one of our coaches last year is actually back in the classroom this year. Which makes a difference when you only got 3 math teachers in your building, and so some of those types of strategies will help as well.
I just want to sidebar on this, just to pair what you said, Richard, but also, how are we essentially teaching parents how they can help their students at home? Because I feel like that's a huge gap, that the way we teach math now is completely different than the way math was taught previously, and trying to bridge that gap where they know where their resources are.
Yes, yeah. So both of the elementary curriculums that we're currently exploring and the elementary curriculum that was adopted at the intermediate school have those parent connections that are built into it. So communication tools that can go out to families, explaining those different steps and resources, etc. And then I think the other aspect, especially for the early elementary grades, are just some of the approaches that those curriculums that we're looking at are taking to create number sense, like that concept of really understanding how numbers work. Which if we can build that into kids, helps with the parent aspect too, and then how that's communicated to parents. I know that when we think about the other element is like, how do we think about quick and easy ways to communicate with families around ways you can support your student at home? I'll use a literacy example just because I have a little more experience with that. But often it's not the come to a math night, come, learn about it. It's really more like, hey, tonight when you're cooking, have your kid count out the tomatoes as they're putting them in the pot. Tonight, when you're doing this, do this math strategy, right? Those pieces of like, how do we give these kind of quick and easy things that can be really incorporated into home life?
I think it's a good question, because I don't know that we're systematically, addressing that right now. I think it's a point, there are, things that we could do, but I think that's another thing that could take a little bit of, asking some families, what I mean, what would be the best kind of support, when's the best kind of support, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And trying to kind of see a little bit what folks might need, and because that would probably lead to a kind of a broad spectrum of.
Yeah, cause I
strategies
see a lot of
to do
people posting, hey, does anybody know a math tutor?
Yeah.
Part 7.
And I know that to the point Dr. Rose was making in the example I was giving, the combo of those two, I know like the intermediate, for example, they're having discussions at a site council level about those exact things. Like, how do we leverage this to start getting more information into our families' hands? So I think it is that combo of like, the old ways of thinking, this is what we have to do, let's instead ask our families about what they need. I know that we had some discussions also with Teachers Development Group around those same things, just to talk about like, how do we even ask parents the right questions so that we know how to get the information we need to better support families.
I wasn't trying to take us off track, I was just,
No,
I mean, math has been a struggle since I've been on the board, and it,
Prior to COVID, what was like a range for the Oregon average prior to, for this metric, for this 8th grade? Was it in the 40s, 50s?
No, math has been a struggle in Oregon historically, yeah. I mean, I could pull that up really quick, I don't know it right off the top of my head, but I don't think it's that far off, to be honest.
Okay.
There was a bigger drop in like ELA, I think,
Yeah.
across the state,
Yeah,
but
that's
math has
huge.
always been a struggle across the state. So the next piece is our 9th grade on track, and this is actually one of our more exciting pieces of data, which is that 11% increase. Just to clarify, 9th grade on track is defined as students who end their 9th grade year with 6 or more credits. So they have completed a 1/4 of the credits they need to be able to graduate on time. And so thinking back to that larger, the chart we were showing, this year's senior classes, when they were freshmen, that on track was 50%. So it's even a higher jump than even just this last year. And this work is really, it's emblematic of work that's happening at the high school. And it kind of relates to the question you were asking, Crystal, which is like, how do we take some system approaches to starting to address these problems? And the work at the high school is really that type of work, that 9th grade success team, and how they're looking at data, how they're trying to think as a team to ways the system at the high school can better meet the needs of their 9th graders so that they are being successful in that transition year. And we know statistically, this is a time where grades dip, period. There's a lot of research around that 9th grade year and why there's this weird dip that kids suddenly take and get off track. But to be at the state average and on track to continue to increase those, that rate overall is awesome. And it ultimately is the thing that will best predict our graduation success. 9th grade on track is probably the #1 predictor of graduation of all the data we have. And that's not just us saying that, but like that's statistically true across the nation. 9th grade on track is the #1 predictor.
And that's why 9th grade on track actually became something to look at.
Yeah.
We started, it's been, what now, 15 years.
Mhm.
When the achievement compacts came out, you know, and ninth grade on track was was a part of that metric.
Then we have our on-time graduation rates. We saw an increase. We're aligned with the state average. Areas of focus for us this year, again, we're still seeing some gap between our white and Latino students. We also saw a pretty significant gap between our male and our female students and their success rate for graduating on time, with females graduating at a higher rate than our male students. And so that, as a team, we were looking at it, and we know that the high school team was taking some real specific deep dives into that information.
This was one of the interesting ones, because we had that particular group of freshmen on track, that data from freshmen on track of the current seniors right now. This is just FYI, that we didn't necessarily believe it. We don't necessarily want to believe it, but this on those longitudinal growth measures that we have for the, that we're tracking for the state. We actually, I think we predicted 80% for this year's seniors. And it was kind of like, because they don't want you to put a number down, you know what I mean? That from the metrics doesn't look like you might make it. But I you know what I mean? I know folks have been working really hard at it. And I'm pretty optimistic that because of all the interventions and opportunities, summer schools and those types of things that have happened, that I think we could still have a chance to grow here again. But you may notice that, or if that ever comes up again, you might notice, why would we predict that 1% less, you know what I mean? Well, it had to do with that on track rate that we had, that group of students had.
And then this is our 5-year completion rate. So students who aren't able to graduate on time, stay a 5th year and finish their graduation requirements the year after, or their GED within 5 years. And so we did have a change, and we stayed at 85%, and we're just below the state average. So we're seeing, some definite area of success. I think the interesting piece too, when kind of connecting it to the integrated growth plan, for us at North Marion, when we're looking at these numbers, it's fractions of children, it's like to raise our rates up. We would say something when we were meeting with the state, we would say like, well, we're gonna get to 87%, for example. And they say, oh, that's a big jump. And we're like, that's one kid. That's literally one kid. And they're like, oh yeah, we forget that you guys are small. And because of that, we're working with a different. So this is a place where, again, we're hoping, and I think, like, to Dr. Rhodes' comment, for me, 5th year is really about the fact that sometimes circumstances make it so that kids need more time. A lot of stuff can get in the way in a kid's life. And when our 5th year graduation rate is good, it means that we kept them engaged and knowing that it was possible. And that they took the opportunity that they had. And so for me, I know for myself, and I hope Deanne and the high school team feels this as well, but this is almost more important, because it means that they didn't get to the spot where they're just like, I'm done, I'm gonna drop out. They knew that they could get across the finish line, that we had the right supports in place. Because just sometimes with circumstances, it takes a little longer, and that's okay.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Also, we're having a little higher number of kids wanting to get their GED. And so we're able to support them with both that pathway, knowing that they are very deficient in credit, that they have a pathway to walk out with a piece of paper. And that's what we're trying to do.
Is this 85% of the 5th year students?
Yes, right? That's how it's, yeah.
How many 5-year students do you have?
This year we have 6.
Okay, so that's where one makes.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, so
And so
they've already
graduated. That's right.
So our students that are in special education who qualify to remain with us, that doesn't count because they've received their certificate or their diploma or whatever it is, and then they stay with us. So they've already been counted in it, even though they remain on our enrollment. Okay.
So, you've seen those and you've got the disaggregated page with the disaggregation on that. You can see that and see why we identified those areas of focus. So these, this is straight report card data. Most of these are also part of that longitudinal tracking that we do for the integrated plan that we report to the state. And, we actually, this data is encouraging. We feel like we're on track to be on track with our growth targets along those lines. We've talked about this before, kind of this notion of, it's one thing to get results and look at the results of assessments or performances and things like that. It's another thing to know whether it was something you did that caused it or not. And last year we talked a lot about, kind of this implementation data. What's the progress monitoring to say, yeah, we're doing these things. So we can at least start to correlate that, maybe not directly cause because there's so many variables, but correlate that with the results that we're getting. And we just made the first quarterly report to the Department of Education around those what they call progress markers. And so in essence, it's very much like we were doing with our strategic plan last year, where we had, our strategies and we were kind of sharing evidence, that we were actually doing what we said we were going to do. And so what you have in your packet now are a couple of examples of what those progress markers are. And we didn't intend on, kind of going into a long report about, all the things we're doing in those areas. But we thought you might find it informative and you might find it interesting to see what those progress markers are. And they do help keep us on track, around those things that would cause us to be, that we're doing, that we could say are connected to progress markers that would be evidence that we might have a chance of achieving the results that were expected. And so I don't know if you want to just bring up a couple of those documents. We have our, the data that we've been collecting is included in a link in your packet. And we're absolutely not going to sit down and talk through all those things tonight. But the diagrams, just in case there were any questions about those.
You want the map diagram or?
Let's start with the map diagram.
So
It's the
click
most
on the
colorful.
first link, Linda, and then you're gonna want to blow it up because it's a kind of a big document. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, just like Bill said, I don't want to go too deep. One thing I would point out too, though, to the point he was making is they're divided up into kind of 3 different sections. And it's that concept of what's those first steps? What would we see first? What's the little sprout coming out of the ground? What are those things that we'd expect to see as those other things are becoming more rooted? We start to see additional steps. And then what are those things that we see later on? So you see there are timelines attached to it a little bit, like first 3 to 6 months, the next like 6 to 18 months. So there are spots where we'd say, well, we're in progress, but we haven't made a lot of development. It's like, yeah, we wouldn't expect you to see development quite yet because it's later on down the road. For me, the big thing as I was doing the report was recognizing where we have systems in place to kind of make a lot of these things happen. Our shifts in how we run PLCs, not necessarily our shift in calendar for time, but just how we're approaching PLCs, which are really more around instructional improvement and giving teachers an opportunity to talk about how to improve what's happening in their classrooms and have different kinds of discussions about data and how students are achieving. The focus on our language learners in particular, where we're seeing the most gaps. And we're seeing a lot of work happening in those areas, and we're hearing from staff a lot of good things around this is what we want to have happen. These are the discussions we want to have. Are there other things, Dr. Rosie, you wanted me to highlight?
Oh, I just, again, there's a little bit of, I think, from the department of, kind of a unscientific trying to link certain progress markers to certain outcomes. But like I said, because variables are complex and they interact with each other, but they try to have us thinking that certain progress markers might be more connected with ninth grade on track than third grade reading or something like that. So you see some of that in there, you know what I mean? But again, we know a lot of things, the way we roll things out are connected together. Also remember that there is, and Linda is kind of the master at this, there's also the notion that certain of these activities are more or progress markers or activities are more closely related to certain funding sources than others. Because another big part of our reporting is actually Linda's magic in saying, you said you were gonna spend this money on this, you know what I mean? Did you do that? Because our plan, that we submitted last year also identified certain activities connected to certain of those aligned grant type of activities from the state, like the Student Investment Account and the High School Success Act and those types of things. So those that have grant money attached to it that we get, we also have to account for doing the activities we said we were gonna do along those lines. So this helps us to organize that as well.
Makes sense.
So again, that's just the kind of, there's the overview, kind of there's the piece. We'll bring pieces of that back in smaller chunks and more detail over time as we report with you over the year. But again, this is what we would call implementation, evidence of implementation, versus a score on a test or something like that.
I do have one more question kind of about the previous thing. Do we have an update on the math for the younger? I think it was it primary school that was delayed?
Yeah, we are starting our pilots. Our first pilot is STEM scopes, and so all these boxes are the STEM scopes materials. And then they will end that just before Christmas break. And then we will begin our second pilot, which is with Bridges, and that will start in like January-ish. And that will probably go about a month, and then we hope to have a decision at that point. And the materials, we're excited again about the materials. Both the materials that the primary school selected are really like hands-on focused. Like, how do we get kids really in the work doing math, not filling in worksheets?
Yeah. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of a sidebar.
No, related, it's definitely related.
Well, and the adoptions that happened last year before, are you getting good support out of the, like, some of the onboarding stuff? And I'm assuming just having teachers sort of accept that new curriculum and really go to town with it.
Yeah,
But that takes time too.
It does. We've heard really good things though, and Connected, we're working with the Teachers Development Group, which is all around math. And last month we did a training. We're doing 2 sets of training. One is with our administrators around what can you see in a math classroom and give effective feedback on. And so we were actually able to go and watch some classes at the high school and really see that curriculum at work, which was exciting. And then we're also working with instructional leaders and instructional coaches from all the different buildings. So it's that piece of teacher leadership and support for teachers. And they're doing similar type work with like, how do we think about our curriculum through the lens of the TDG instructional framework, which was what we adopted as our math instructional framework. Not to get too far in the weeds, because I promised I wouldn't talk a lot, but the TDD work really focuses on how do you become a math thinker and how do you become a math talker? Like, how do you really have discourse about math? And so when we're in there in classrooms looking, when the coaches are in there thinking about how to coach it, that's what we're really trying to get kids to be able to do, is actually talk about their reasoning, justify their answers, be able to explain themselves. And so that work with TDG has been really powerful. And we had them specifically come in, work with us on looking at our curriculum and saying, like, how do we make this curriculum work for the methods of teaching that we are wanting to align to? And the great news we heard from TDG was, you picked the right curriculum. This is the work we would want to do. And especially at the high school, they was like, it was really exciting. I left feeling so good about the choice we had made. And we heard the same thing about the middle school curriculum, and the intermediate schools curriculum, so.
The high school math, they are doing a pilot right now?
No, they adopted, so they have picked theirs is Carnegie. And it has an additional component called Mathia that really helps kids practice when they have maybe some gaps or places they need additional support.
So that was just adopted and that's now for 7 years?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah. Yep,
But the pilot's happening at the primary.
at the primary. The primary did not select materials. They were kind of overwhelmed by their previous ELA adoption, and so they asked for a pause. And so they're finishing their pilot this year.
Okay.
All the other buildings, though, this is their first year.
Yes.
On the new curriculum.
Yeah, so we've been getting training from the textbook companies themselves, and that's been ongoing. I know that the intermediate school just did a follow-up training with their textbook company. The high school has one that will actually be part of our teaching and learning summit, that they'll be getting some additional support. The middle school did theirs in August. The high school did the majority of theirs in August as well. And then we have some folks who, we will have TDG here for both days of our learning summit, doing specialized supports for each of the different levels.
Is Mathia and, do you say Carnegie?
Carnegie, those are the same company.
Okay.
Yeah, so Mathia is a computer program that's part of the Carnegie Math. So Carnegie Math is the big textbook, and then Mathia is kind of, I think, kind of a game-based program is the best way to describe it, where students can get on and just have additional practice with the math that they're learning in class and getting some hands-on experience with in class. And so the teachers then get information from that, those kind of interactions on the computer, and it sends them messages of like, this is, the kid got stuck on problem 3, they're really struggling, and so then the teacher knows how to follow up the next day to make sure additional support's being given. So there's just a lot of information gathering that happens through Mathia that then communicates with the teacher so they can provide the right supports. So, and we've heard fairly good things about it from the students, that they're actually enjoying the Mathia piece, at least initially, you know, so that's a good sign. And that's, I will say, with our core math, so that is algebra, algebra 2, and geometry. At our upper level math is aligned to our college credit alignment, so they have different textbooks that aren't part of Carnegie. So if they're in like trig or college algebra, then it's what we use through Chemeketa.
I was gonna say, does that interface with Chemeketa's?
Chemeketa, and we're doing through, not Chemeketa this year, but yeah, OIT. Well, one's through OIT and one's through Western. Yeah. Thank you. So, and we're using the textbooks that, not textbooks with one of them. No, it's the same textbook as before. Yeah. Yep. So,
They approved that textbook.
yeah.
So not to open Pandora's box, I've asked you this before, but a lot of this, we're on a new schedule, so we don't have the Wednesdays. I just wanted to kind of get a sense from you whether you think that needs a relook to consider Wednesday again, or whether
Might
track
be
that we're
good, might
on.
be good for us to gather a little data and think about that a little
Okay.
bit. Glenn.
I mean, I know it's really early,
Mhm.
to look at that. I just didn't know from, from your juncture and adoption, because, you just had adoption and onboarding staff for all those things and the other things that happen on Wednesday. That's not the only thing that happens on Wednesday too.
Sure.
And I know we chatted a little bit in your office one day about it's nice having a block of time, but it's also tough to find, so.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I know that, we had talked with the association about ways to gather some of that data piece that Dr.
Yeah.
Rhodes was talking about, so, and I know that I have some pieces that will be in place during the learning summit to make sure we gather the information from that too.
Cool, and that'll be good, to see how
Absolutely.
things go, so. Yep.
When is the touring of buildings and classes? Does that?
That's just something we just need to sit down and sort out.
Mhm.
And there's a couple of ways you can think about doing it. I know you try to get, everybody together, to, at the same time, the same place, a few times in your cycles, and you can do that. There is a notion too that, if smaller groups want to set up, learning walks and go through a learning session when we're doing them, our principals, are fine with that. Our staff members are getting used to us now, kind of walking through and those types of things. So I can, invite folks, when we're getting ready to do some learning walks and things like that, if you're available and want to come by and, and join in. And maybe I can sit down and work with, Crystal and Glenn, and sort of think out how to schedule. It might be a little more formal of board walkthroughs.
Well, it might be less intimidating for the kids.
What's that?
Might be less intimidating to have like 5 straight adults come into the classroom.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, when we did our admin walkthroughs with math, there was like 12 of us that all
Yeah.
walked in.
And they're like, oh.
Yeah, nothing stops learning faster than a bunch of teachers coming to class.
But it's, and Deanne, you maybe experience it a little bit more. There is kind of developing this culture of people being around and being in classrooms more often, and kids are more just like, oh, here they are again, and so they're getting used to it, but it's really good for them to see that the adults are learning too and working on their own learning.
A lot of positives in both communities and the teachers.
I'll probably make some progress on that. Coordinate either way.
Mhm.
direction, but,
Mhm. Yeah.
I'll get back to you soon, because my vision was for us to do something maybe this month and then this month of December. If we can.
But it's Thanksgiving.
That's the thing. Next
It's
week
snuck
is-
up
next
from
week is not-
nowhere.
so we might be done this month. But I think we talked about maybe going to the middle school first.
It'd be great. I know Deanne is always, happy to host us.
I'm always happy.
Well, you're always a good host, too. You always have a job for us to go see.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, and Stacy is the same way. She's,
Yeah.
she's fine and, very much up for that. And like I said, the intermediate and primary school are getting used to it as well. But sometimes that's just a little different, slightly different, kind of schedule and things like that, ways to think about it.
And I will add, you will receive an email from a program called Sketched. It's not actually, doesn't say the actual word, but it will be an invite to the teaching and learning. So if you have opportunity on Monday and Tuesday to come, you can build your own schedule, or at least look at what the options are. And if you don't, you can at least look at the really cool program we found to take this to the next level.
Are those taking place in classrooms? or
Yes.
in- Okay.
We will be mostly at the high school. We're kind of using the pretty
Using that,
building. Mhm. So there'll be some here at the middle school also.
Okay.
And we have probably, at any given time, probably about 8 different sessions that will be happening that you could choose from. Yep.
Yeah.
Outside speakers and inside.
And if anyone would like to, share a powerful opening.
Yes, we're looking for a
or
keynote.
Monday morning, it does have to be a keynote.
Why, if you want one. Anyone has a speech in their back pocket they've been dying to
We'll
give?
give you, we'll put out a little time frame Monday morning, you know what I mean? And you're welcome anytime, all day long, but we'll do a
Yeah.
little welcome, on Monday morning. And if you're there, we're really happy to, be proud to introduce you, to staff.
This is the 20th and 21st.
Yeah, so it would be Monday morning, the 20th, yeah.
Yep.
So. No pressure.
You'll sing a song.
Careful.
You sing a song, I'll recite it.
We can have an open mic, we can do it that way.
Hey, I was in a class today and heard the MOM spells mom song.
Alrighty, well, that is all that's on our agenda. Does anybody have anything else or updates or anything? Otherwise, it is 8:06. We will go ahead and adjourn
Good.
tonight. So thanks, everybody.
Richard's taking me on a date tomorrow night to,
Yay.
Aurora City Council.
Nice.